A budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it disappeared. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is Interim Budget 2022. Will it at least make you rich? We will try to find answers for that question. Joining us this evening on the show are N.R. Gajendran, a tax expert. Also joining us tonight on Face the Nation is Dr. Anurek Nayaga, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, as well as Dr. Priyanka Dunasinghe, senior lecturer, University of Colombo, also a member of the Central Bank Stakeholder Engagement Committee. A very good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the show. Let's start off tonight's show with Dr. Anurek Nayaga, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Dr. Nayaga, interestingly, a few months ago when President Ranil Wickremesinghe took over office, and even before that, when he was the Prime Minister of the country, he said that he's expecting to table a budget, 2022, an interim budget, to provide relief as far as the people are concerned, because the people have been struggling with daily power cuts, shortage of basics such as fuel, food and medicine. Will President Ranil Wickremesinghe pull a rabbit out of the hat tomorrow during his budget speech as far as the year 2022 is concerned? A few months from now, what's going to happen tomorrow?
Shamir, good evening and thanks for bringing me here this evening. It's not only the President, but we have also been hearing from other cabinet ministers that some kind of relief, targeted relief to the worst affected people of this nation has to be given. The shape and form of that we will only know tomorrow, because specific proposals are only shared at the budget speech. But I think the intention is fairly clear. It seems that there is a kind of a consensus at cabinet level to that we cannot afford to have across the board subsidies, and that's why in recent times we have seen energy prices being adjusted, and the latest is, I think, from 1st of September, water rates are also going up, and then provide targeted relief to worst affected people in this society. That seems to be the emerging consensus. But exactly in which form it will be implemented, we still don't know. And when you look at the appropriation bill, it is only a set of numbers. It lists the amount to be proposed to be spent under each ministry and certain other institutions of the government. It doesn't give us a breakdown, so we don't know.
2022 budget, which was presented by former Minister of Finance Basil Rajapaksa last year, had a lot of allocations made with regard to defense as well as infrastructure development projects. If you look at this year, infrastructure development projects have taken a snail pace with regard to how it had unfolded as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, because of the current economic turmoil it faces at the moment. Will we see a reallocation of funds from ministries of this sort to ministries that really require the money? Examples, the Ministry of Social Welfare, the Ministry of Disaster Management, for an example. Will we see this?
It's at this point of time, Shamir, it's not clear, because as I said, the numbers presented in the appropriation bill are ministry by ministry, and the programs are not identified within that. So it is possible for a relief program to be implemented through the Ministry of Social Services, but also through the Ministry of Finance. So we wouldn't know exactly from where these targeted support programs will be implemented. But as I said earlier, it's a dire need. It is essential because with inflation running at near 70% and some predicting to go beyond that towards the end of the year, it is absolutely essential that the poorer segments of the society ought to be supported, very generously supported.
Right.
Without that, this whole society will collapse. There won't be peace in this country. So I'm sure the politicians are sensitive to this. If not, they had better be sensitive because it's a very dangerous scenario. Right?
How far the politicians in Sri Lanka would be sensitive would completely depend on the way in which things would unfold as far as the next few weeks and months are concerned, Dr. Eknaika, because right now, if you look at it, certain section of the society are quite happy with the 20 liters of petrol that they get. Is that a fair analogy to come across as far as how forgetful Sri Lankans are?
See, Shamir, the reality is that the poorer segments of the society have to spend a very large percentage of their income on daily essentials. Very rich people spend a very tiny, minuscule amount of their income on those essentials. So, the way inflation impacts different classes of people earning, say, income classes would be very different. So, here in the metropolis, if you go to places where the richer people gather, you will certainly get the feeling that people are very happy. But if you go out of the city or even in the city, if you go to the localities where low-income people live, then you will get a totally different picture. You go out into the countryside, see what's happening in the villages, see what their consumption basket is now from what it was. Imagine an egg at 60 rupees. Just think of it. And what was the price 1 year ago? Almost all the essential food items, the prices have doubled or have increased by a bigger percentage. And the incomes of the people have not increased. So,
Dr. Eknaika, I think you hit the nail on the head when you say how the prices of food items have increased significantly. 250 grams of sprats is now being sold at over 700 rupees. And a kilogram of dal is going over 700 rupees at popular supermarkets in Colombo. And how can people afford it? So do you see a ration pact being granted? Because the IMF is also very, very concerned about the poverty levels of any country when they enter. So right now, there is a current bailout plan that is being discussed. I am of the knowledge that right now there are 3 teams visiting Colombo. One is a team from IMF, one is a team from the World Bank, and one is a team from the Lasage group as well. So they are in discussions with central bank officials with regard to a way forward. Do you think that they may have had a say with regard to tomorrow's interim budget that will be presented by President Ranil Wickremesinghe in his capacity as the Minister of Finance?
Whether they had a direct influence, I don't know. I'm not in the know. But certainly their statements, public statements, could have at least those public statements would have nudged the government towards the right direction.
Right.
Because if you recall the communique issued by the IMF team when they were here the last time round, they specifically mentioned targeted poverty relief measures, the need for that.
Right.
So that's a good indication.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Henrika Naik, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. I have a lot of questions directed at the three gentlemen, so I will now cross over to N.R. Gajendran, tax expert and also a very vocal member of Face the Nation usually. Gajendran, let me start off asking you my first question. What is your thinking with regard to the new appointment of a president and a new government to the country? Does it send a very strong signal to investors who want to come and invest in Sri Lanka?
The president was appointed through a constitutional process. When the president resigned, the earlier president, through the constitutional process he was appointed. The parliament is still the same. The parliament is still the same. 2019 parliament is still the same. This is a concern because though the president is brand new, the people who are calling the shots and who will make the decision are the same old bunch of people. So there are concerns of credibility and legitimacy. You know, that is one of the reasons why people got onto the streets. That position has not changed. And if you see, that is the reason even the president is saying we want an all-party government or an all-party governance, whatever it may be, but that is not in the pipeline. So you can't say, yes, the new president is hailed as a person who has information, knowledge and adroitness to lead under these difficult circumstances. Even his worst critic might say so. But you can't be looking for a talisman or prince in a shining harbor to emerge from somewhere to solve the problem. Just if he is the best person at the moment, but he must have also parliament will understand what he says and talk the language.
Gajendran, are you satisfied with the all-party government concept? Would we see something different subsequent to tomorrow's interim budget speech that will be made by President Ranil Wickremesinghe?
The democracy is the majority rules, but minority can govern. The majority in the parliament has not changed. It's the same people. And even if there's an all-party government, if majority thinks that they will not support something, that will be the end of the all-party government. You know, unless otherwise the party leaders come together and decide and say, no, if we agree at what particular level, that is what you're talking of all-party governance. So that is a challenge. I mean, you know, it's not going to be easy because the people who had, the public at large who had confidence in the people in 2019, I think that has been zeroed.
Right. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of the interim budget that will be presented tomorrow, Gajendran. Now, interestingly, if you look at the expenditure for the year 2022, it is hovering in the number of approximately around 4 trillion in terms of capital as well as recurrent expenditure for the year 2022. The income is hovering in approximately around 2.4 trillion. So there is a significant gap of approximately around 1.6 trillion that we're talking about approximately. How is the government going to find the money?
These numbers you mentioned, Samira, was in what was pronounced in the 2022 budget.
Yeah.
Overall expenditure is about 4 trillion and the revenue is about 2.4 trillion or 2.6 trillion. But if you see the appropriation bill, which was presented in August 8th, if you go through the numbers, you can see the total recurrent and capital expenditure of the ministries is going up by about 650 billion rupees to 600 to 700 billion rupees. And what has happened is in this appropriation bill, they have regrouped and reclassified the some of the ministries, very difficult to identify a comparative thing from 22 what was presented in for the 22 budget that was somewhere last year October in the appropriation bill, to match it with 22 bill which was presented a few weeks ago. You can't match, but two items you have you can identify where the expenditure has gone up. Maybe that's on a good score, is on education. From 127 billion it has gone to about 200 billion, and also health has gone up about 90 odd billion rupees. Also in the lighter vein, even the defense expenditure has gone up by 3 billion, that's almost 1% of the defense expenditure. But other increases, so now there is additional expenditure budgeted in the appropriation bill of about 600 to 700 billion additionally. And of course there will be no revenue proposals coming. With the revenue proposals, we would know how much increase you can get. Only you will get the increase in the rate differential from 1st of June,
right,
and on the policy things from 1st of October. Yeah.
Right. In terms of borrowings, because now it is very clear that whatever deficit that we have to bridge has to come in from domestic borrowings. Am I right, Gajendra?
Yes, it is not only now, even if you see 2020 and 2021, the entire budget deficit had to be financed through domestic borrowing.
Right.
Because in the external account there was a net outflow, and also the domestic borrowing was nothing very insignificant from non-banking sources, and most of them from central bank monetary enhancement.
So right now, Gajendran, we are talking a lot about restructuring our international debt, but we're focusing a little, very little, as far as domestic debt is concerned. How important is it for President Ranil Wickremesinghe to touch on this at tomorrow's budget speech?
No, already the domestic expenditure has been increased for this year.
Yeah, significantly.
650 to 600 to 700 billion, if my numbers are correct, because the appropriation totals are not given. So it's about 600 to 700 billion has gone up. And the additional revenue might get, I don't know, my estimate is about 100 billion, maximum 100 to maybe 150, 200 for the next, on the difference arising from the increase in rates in VAT, and also the corporate increases will come only from October, and when the registration is passed.
Gajendran, this seems to be like a stop-shop gap, because we know that 2023 the government needs to present a budget as well. So we are just a few months away from the end of the year. Is it really prudent to have an interim budget now?
Yes, of course, because our revenues were slashed disproportionately in 2000, and we lost about, on an annual basis, to about 600 to 800 billion rupees. So now you have to recoup some of them. We are recouping it now, and also the government has to demonstrate that we are going in for fiscal consolidation, because IMF is around the corner, and naturally we have to show that we are serious about fiscal consolidation. And also expenditure management. Expenditure management, we will have to speak a little louder, because expenditure is going up, and I hope your question is whether this is going to the vulnerable segment of the society, where is it end up, or where is it vanishing, you said, no? So whether it will end up in the hands
vanishing
of
to the thin air. Is that something that we expect
so we have to see, but that
in the
is
next few months as well?
You know, focusing.
We've experienced that, Gajendran, very well during the last since 1948. We've seen money vanishing very under respective political leadership in the country. So will that happen with this leadership also?
That I don't know. It shouldn't, because if if this country wants to come out of this wood, shonky, shady politicians can't be making decisions and can't be in authoritative position.
Right. Thank you very much, N.R. Gajendran, tax expert. And now move my attention to Dr. Priyanka Dunusinghe, a senior lecturer at University of Colombo. The last time Dr. Dunusinghe was here, he only had one title, that is the position of senior lecturer at University of Colombo. Now you have another title as well, Dr. Dunusinghe. Now that is being a member of the Stakeholder Engagement Committee established by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Weeks after y'all were appointed, y'all came up, not y'all, the government came up with a list to restrict the many imports to the country. Was that part of the stakeholder engagement committee recommendations?
First, thank you for inviting for the program.
It's always a pleasure to have you, Dr. Narasimha.
Yes, and in fact, we are not in a position to say which decision is part of the committee.
Because you all have signed the document.
So, if I consider it in a very
in a broader perspective.
Yeah, broader perspective, that decision to control imports, certainly a temporary measure which was taken to address the foreign exchange constraint in the in the short run. Sometime due to the behavior of certain traders to engage in some informal foreign exchange activities where they pay higher, maybe the kind of a premium to buy foreign exchange from the informal market and then take them to the bank and finance the imports. So there are many of such situations. So government basically wants to have a control for a shorter period to address the short run gaps in the foreign exchange. I think it will remain as a temporary measure.
Dr. Narasimha, kudos to the governor of the central bank, Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, for being able to bring as thin as possible the margins in the formal banking sector as well as the informal banking sector, like the black market, as far as the dollar is concerned. But my question to you is this the actual dollar against the rupee that we are witnessing at the moment when it comes to numbers? Now, we know that the situation is bleak. We know that the situation is not that great for Sri Lanka. But if you look at the dollar against the Sri Lankan rupee, the rupee seems to be stabilizing for a certain extent. Is this an artificial manipulation done by the central bank of the country, or is it based on supply and demand itself?
I think certainly one can argue for or against the position, but as policymakers, I think we need to make sure that the exchange rate, they basically it is important to have a stable exchange rate at a situation of this nature in this context, so that expecting some developments in future, such as arrangements with the IMF and then the bridge financing from the World Bank, ADB, and the other measures that the central bank has taken in recent past. Central bank assume that the rates to be stabilized somewhere around the current rate. But if one can say that it is not the rate and it has to go up by another 40 rupee or 50 rupee, and by doing so encourage speculation in the economy, and then at the end of the day it will happen. It is like that, if you expect rain, I mean you take an umbrella and go out just because you expect a rain, it will not happen that way in a natural setup. But if you speculate something to happen in the economy and larger majority behave in that way, that could happen. So in this context, I think we should not speculate as such, saying that the exchange rate to have another additional 40 to 50 rupee. Though we have some information, but I am sure that policymakers are aware of that, and they expect some future developments will gradually stabilize and make the current exchange rate stronger.
Dr. Narasimha, one of the biggest allegations leveled at the export companies of Sri Lanka is the fact under invoicing. Also, another allegation that is leveled at the export sector of Sri Lanka is the fact that they are not bringing in the money to the country. As a result of that, the central bank took a measure recently saying that you don't have to convert the US dollars that you bring into the country, which is looked at as a positive sign by the exporters of the country. But has the central bank taken any action against such perpetrators?
I have no idea, simply.
But don't you think that action needs to be taken?
Definitely,
because you can nab that, because if you look at the customs entries and you know the price in which the goods have been sold at, and then you can have the 90 days or 120 days period in which the government has to get in the money, and then calculate that figure and come into a conclusion as to this is the exact number that Sri Lanka has lost, and then based on that have a chat with the export companies and penalize them if there are any issues.
Yeah, definitely. I think there is a broader understanding and much deeper insight into various what we call mechanisms through which both exporters and importers engage in various form of foreign exchange inflows and outflows. I think recent even the research indicated with respect to Sri Lanka, this under invoicing and over invoicing actually used for the purpose of basically transferring some illegally earned money in dollar form, and a lot of such malpractices happen. So I think the central bank and the relevant authorities must have a very sophisticated mechanisms in detecting not just the importers and exporters, but behind the exporters and importers there may be politicians, public officials, even other businessmen who wants to send their wealth out of the country and may use different tactics. So I think this is time for the officials to think of a very sophisticated system which should be in place to make sure that we do not witness foreign exchange outflows in a legal way.
Right. Dr. Nussi, I want to open the floor for questions from our journalists. On my immediate right is Disal Kapuga, and on to my immediate left is Shehan Ranatunga. I want to quickly pose one question to you because of the fact that we spoke about import restrictions that have been brought forward by the government authorities. Under the new temporary suspended products to import, why did the government include IT products, whereas IT is treated as an essential backbone of the country's development?
Yeah, I mean, it is very easy if you read out these 300 items. I mean, different sectors people may say those are essential. Okay, so we cannot define essential or non-essential goods as such. Maybe the some of the things, even the clothing and cosmetics and all these things are very much essential in some sectors for their domestic production as well as to engage in the exporting activities. So similarly the IT is an easy example, or something that we can easily show to others and say, look, even the IT restricted now, I mean, it will have a big impact. True. That is why I mentioned that this decision, I am sure, was taken as a kind of a last resort, where we need to have some sort of control over the foreign exchange in order to make sure you get the fuel, okay, in order to make sure that you get the medicine, in order to make sure you get some other essential which are very much needed in order to keep not just the economy running but also to keep the peace in the society. So I mean, you have different alternatives and you have to accordingly act.
Sir?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Singh. I'd like to direct my question to Dr. Anra. Now, one of the main issues that we see with government expenditure is that there's a lot of bleeding that happens in terms of state enterprises. State enterprises suffer a lot of losses, and previously, actually since recently, we've been talking a lot about expenditure in terms of the civil sector. We have employment more than we should, and even the IMF put very straightforward recommendations on how we need to cut down on this expenditure. So as an expert in the financial sector, now with the interim budget coming forward, this needs to be addressed. So what areas can we expect budget cuts? What areas should the government focus on into addressing this issue?
It's a critical question, and you would have noted in the last few days, several of the cabinet ministers have made statements highlighting overmanning of SOEs, state-owned enterprises. They have identified organizations like the Petroleum Corporation, Ceylon Electricity Board, Sri Lankan Airlines, and so on. So I think there is a degree of recognition that this is a problem which needs to be addressed. Now, the huge challenge is how is the government going to reduce the number of employees, but at the same time protect the those individuals and their families from falling into dire circumstances, utter poverty, even starvation. So it's a balancing act. And there are examples all over the world on how these things are done.
Would you be
fairly
kind
straightforward thing is VRSS.
Can you be kind enough to elaborate some examples, some models?
Yes, I mean, one is voluntary retrenchment schemes, where certain compensation is given to the people and they are encouraged to look for employment elsewhere. Say they can go abroad. Already government has brought in a program for public servants to get leave and go abroad, that sort of stuff. And also retraining, so that people who get retrenched can either be self-employed or they can get employment elsewhere. But it's not an easy thing to do because of the sheer magnitude of the problem. Very large numbers of people are involved. Now some are in fact saying the public sector, the numbers of people can be halved, kind of thing. So it's a frightening number, because
what are these people
the
going to
issue
do afterwards? Now that's a very big question mark that would linger on in any government that is going to win a vote on a popular basis at the end of the day, Dr. Ekanayak, isn't it?
Yes. But the more critical thing is, here are these individuals who are paid by the government, all right, their productivity may not be high enough, but they have families. And the people have to have their food, clothing, shelter, education, all of that. So the balancing act requires alternative employment system where the economy generates alternative employment to absorb those people. They can't be just staying at home. But there may be instances where it is still worth the while from the side of the government to tell the people, the excess people, you stay at home, we'll give you part of the salary and you do whatever you like. Already public servants are told to stay one day or sometimes 2 days at home and cultivate their home garden. Of course, one has to ask the question.
But Dr. Ekanayake,
those who don't have a home
yeah,
gun, what do they
but
do?
Dr.
Very
Ekanayake, look at Sri Lanka for an example. The Sapugaskanda oil refinery has been closed for months. The overtime bill of that facility is over 420 million.
Right.
What a joke! Who are we trying to fool at the end of the day? Isn't that the responsibility of the government itself?
Of course.
This is the minister in charge who comes to Parliament and reveals this. And then you try to wonder, if the minister in charge is coming and revealing this in Parliament, what is the stand he has with regard to his authority in that establishment in question?
Correct. But I must say, we have to be thankful now the ministers are talking about those things. There was a time it didn't happen. Now at least they are saying, look, this has happened. So, recognition of a problem is the beginning of the process of transformation. Because otherwise, you push it under the carpet.
Dr. Ekanayake, now 2 weeks ago we had a member of the Ceylon Electricity Board, the acting general manager, when posed questions about whether payee taxes have been paid by the Ceylon Electricity Board, the acting general manager didn't even have words. He didn't even have words to respond. His answer was, the matter has now been arrested. Now the question is not about the matter being arrested, Dr. Ekanayake. The question is, why has that been done for such a long time with the public's money, when the payee taxes are supposed to be paid by the employee concerned?
Absolutely, yes. And Shamir, this matter had come up at the Committee of Public Enterprises of the Parliament several times, and for a number of years ago as well. Nothing has happened. So all these things, even the overtime issue, all these things also show that apart from reducing the number of people, there are a lot of other leakages which can be and must be immediately arrested.
And also it begs the question, Dr. Anwar, now obviously you're more expert in terms of financial side, but do you think this government would make a stand, would take proactive steps to correct this? Because it seems like what Shamir said, the popularity of the government is hanging on a very thin thread. So do you think they'll be bold enough? Do you think President Ranil Wickremesinghe would be bold and also smart enough, looking at the future, to take these decisions in the next interim budget which is coming tomorrow?
But he has no choice, isn't it? Because you see, we talked about import restrictions a little while ago.
Yeah.
Why are we doing that? Because there is no other choice. We are pushed to a corner. We are not generating sufficient foreign currency through exports, both merchandise and service
But
exports.
then, Dr. Anwar, the problem is...
So it has to be done, because otherwise what happens is, day by day, the level of consumption of our people, the basket of goods they can consume, will get less and less. What has happened to petrol and diesel? Right? People are now consuming less, partly because of supply constraints, but mostly because the prices have gone up by such a magnitude.
Amount.
But Dr. Anwar,
so there's no. I must insist here.
Exactly.
There's no choice. There's no choice. Action has to be taken. But
will they take action?
As
That's
Mr. Gagendran pointed out earlier, the huge problem is the Parliament is the same old Parliament.
Exactly.
And for many of the required measures, certain laws will have to get amended, certain regulations have to be passed, and for those things, the majority support of the Parliament is required. Without that, you can't go forward. So that is perhaps the biggest hurdle. If I go by public statements of the President and some of the ministers in the cabinet, I feel that they now understand that reforms are absolutely essential. But will they have the support of the Parliament to do it, leave alone the general public? But if they don't do it, then day after day, the consumption basket will get less and less. See, what happens is, if you take 2018 kind of numbers, we were importing nearly double the value of the goods and services we exported, right? Double. Now to balance this, then our consumption has to be halved, reduced by 50%.
Right.
Imagine the plight of our people then. So politicians, the president, cabinet have no choice. They got to act.
So, Gajendran, coming back to public statements that have been projected by or made by President Ranil Wickremesinghe and also ministers during the recent past, sends a very strong signal. I want to drag your attention to the inaugural speech made by President Ranil Wickremesinghe in Parliament. He says that it is time to reform the country, and I won't be there to see these reforms, and I know that it will be very late when Sri Lanka reaps the benefits of these reforms. So this is a very strong statement. I recollect such a statement being made by Lee Kuan Yew, the Singaporean one-time president as well, saying that reforms would be instilled in Singapore, and that's the way in which the country will progress in the next few years. So don't you think such a strong statement at least would give the right sort of mentality to the people that reforms are the order of the day at the end of the day?
Yes, definitely. Not only reform, the restructure. Just reforms is not necessarily restructure. We can do little things. When Andrew was talking about the parliament and the parliamentarians, why can't we straight away make it mandatory for all the parliamentarians to make their assets declared? Make it mandatory. You don't need to make it mandatory, and see whether they can match their assets with their income. Right? So you don't need to do, a lot of planned things, little things. Immediately you will zero in so many issues, right? The reality is, stark reality is staring at us. If you think people they will not if you send them out of employment, they will not be able to feed their families. That is all true. Automatically it will happen. There will be a time you come where you will be not allowed to print money, because when you go to the IMF, this time they have put one primary condition. Of course, they are emphasizing vulnerable segments has to be looked after specifically, but they are saying your debt sustainability has to be guaranteed. They are not going to come and give you money for you to be giving goodies. This entitlement culture and populist culture has to go off. So if you are not prepared to do that, and if you are marking for time, your nosedive will be faster, harder and sharper. Right? There is no question about it. We have already come. Now what we are hammering, we are rationing. Right? We are rationing our consumptions, we are restricting our consumption, and we are managing and going. Don't forget about all the foreign debt repayments have been stalled now. So that money is saved. Your earlier question is whether this dollar is reflective of the real situation. It may be, Samira, for two reasons mainly. Because the outflow of the foreign currency on the debt repayment and debt servicing is stalled. Right? And you have curbed your consumption. If you see, even the rationing of the fuel is come to about 60% of your normal consumption. So with all the imports, now we are doing a cash flow management. So that way the dollar is reflective of the current state of affairs. But this state of affairs can't go on, no? You will have to, who is to decide what is essential and what is not essential? And also, can you regulate a market by legislation? You can bring legislation and say, I am going to penalize all the exporters. You think the exporters will be in this country? Already they are rebasing themselves outside. No, you must allow you have to incentivize anyone. If they are not doing something, you have to show them why they are rightfully do that, not by force and regulation. Why did they remove they have removed they are not mandatory conversion, they are not removed for all exporters, only service providers. Because service providers, there is no stress. Right? Exporters, you can have a trace. And when you have this type of compliance and review mechanism, there are exporters who get irritated because they are brought in the money, they are all the records in our government are not up to the mark and incomplete and inaccurate. They are saying you are not brought in your they are writing letters. Now they have to prepare and write and all those things when they have already brought in their monies. So you can't regulate market by legislation. You have to understand. Markets have to function. You can't regulate price and tell people to supplier require some. That can't happen. You can't regulate quantity and ask them to give at a particular price. It can't happen. So you have to, this reality has to be born and you have to decide. For this, you must be able to make competent decisions and it should be corrupt-free decisions.
Corrupt-free decisions?
Yeah.
Reality in Sri Lanka?
No, otherwise you will go worse than this. It has to come. All the other countries, they have gone through similar processes. Even Germany went through money printing inflation years ago, right? So this has to get reversed somewhere. No?
So Gajendra, let me ask you this question. Do you think with the current political authority in power, can we expect a corrupt-free Sri Lanka? Because there are previous examples in which there have been many issues with these respective governments in play. Can we expect that? Is that something that we can think ahead and say,
you don't need to expect
Sri Lanka
you don't need to expect it has to happen. You don't need to expect it has to happen until that takes place,
right.
Comes in the real perspective and not only legislation. You have to legislate for that, not for the business. Right. You have to legislate to make sure they are brought to task. Immunity and impunity is at its best here, no? Right? If you are on the right, if you are in politics and if you are rightly connected with politics, you are fully immunized and impunity is at its best. So you can't go on like this. We have already know this country can't be in this position. This is an island. For human beings to live, you need only 3 items. I have been saying this. You need air, water and food. Island, we have, our pollution is, you can breathe and it's clean air. You go to any other neighboring countries, other countries, you breathe fumes, right? Our water is very potable water. There may be shortage in certain areas. There can be certain areas the water is not so potable. And food, green 365 days. How can this country be in this position? After that you need little money for health, then education and housing. That's all the human needs, no? Food, clothing, nutrition, right. Education and health.
Right. So we have a question for Dr. Dunu Singh as well, but before that, Dr. Dunu Singh, with your permission, can I ask what the mandate of the Stakeholder Engagement Committee is? Because there are 17 members in this committee. What is the mandate? I know you can't talk about the contents of the meetings because there was only one meeting so far, yes. Right? So I'm not going to ask you about the contents of the meeting because I'm very well aware that you all had signed a closure letter saying that you all won't reveal the contents of the meeting and the outcomes of the meeting. So I'm not going to ask you about that. But what is the mandate of this committee? Because we've seen committees after committees being appointed. Yes. But this is an amalgamation of 2 committees. That's yes. The monetary and the fiscal committee. Can you just explain a little bit about that to us?
Monetary and the actually financial sector,
right, okay.
Committee. And even though I am not authorized to speak about the mandate of the committee as such, but I could say broadly speaking to provide some inputs as well as to raise concerns related to economic policy making, which will be useful for, in particular for the monetary policy making process. So largely the committee consists of members coming from different business association, academia, research entities. So they can provide inputs or raise concerns which at the end of the day will be useful when it comes to policy making process. So that is the broader definition that I could give you.
I can't grill you any further on that subject. No, Dr. Dunasinghe. It's not fair. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Congratulations on the appointment, by the way. There are 17 members, all celebrated economists as well as private sector actors who are in this particular committee in question. So we have a question for you from one of our viewers who are watching the show tonight. The question is, you spoke about the ban on imports. The question is relating to that. The ban of items is to assist the government to bring in important needs, but what about the number of others who will lose their incomes and their existence? Won't it get hampered? Who is responsible for this state of affairs in the country? Is it the general public who should be held to account?
No, I mean, certainly we have to agree with this situation where now not just due to the economic mismanagement of the previous president or the previous government, but number of governments, you know, did some of the, let's say, policy errors or mismanaged acts. So as a result of that, plus the pandemic, plus the economic mismanagement of the last government, we basically came to this crisis. And now, in order to, when we take measures to prevent this further, you know, getting it worse, we have to take certain measures. Now, under that, we increase the, for example, interest rate as to control the inflation. As a result of that, we know that during this year, economy will, you know, contracted by say 7 to 8%. So as a result, many jobs, self-employments and direct they work as employees, they will lose the job. So this is, I mean, this is expected. No, I mean, we expect this to happen when we take these measures. The outcome will be like that. But we need to see how we can compensate them, or how we can make it only confine it to only a shorter period and immediately correct them in future.
Yeah, but Dr. Dunasinghe, the question was, why must the general public pay the brunt?
Actually, it is the general public who are responsible at the end of the day.
Isn't it the leaders of Sri Lanka who have to be taken into account for mismanaging the country's economy?
No, I mean, very easily we all the time say politician. At the end of the day,
people appoint politicians.
People appoint and people select their leaders on the basis of the things that they can get from him or her, maybe in terms of subsidy, or maybe in terms of a job or another appointment, or, you know, sending his daughter or son to the, you know, better school. You know, people are corrupt. Larger majority of people are corrupt in Sri Lanka. So according to, I mean, in line with that, we got a corrupted politician and officials. So now it is time for us to reflect on this and get corrected.
Right. So, Dr. Ekanayake, do you agree with Dr. Dunasinghe's thoughts about people have to be held responsible? It's not the politicians alone.
I find it a bit difficult to agree with my friend Dr. Dunasinghe. I think he has a point, though. In a democracy, parliamentary system, there is the politicians are elected by vote. But I have a view that electing politicians for a 5-year period where they can do anything as they wish is something we ought to change. We need to consider seriously things like recall mechanisms, ways in which certain projects, certain expenditures can be reviewed by the public. Now there are these are things which have been introduced in certain countries, and it can then tame the politicians, keep them under control. So So I see that as a serious inadequacy of the representative democracy we have here in Sri Lanka. But with regard to the people having to carry the burden of the policy mistakes of the politicians and bureaucrats is a very unfortunate thing. I think it's very, very unfair. However, that's how it has always happened. That's how it always will happen. So what we have to do is to build a system where it cannot happen in the first place. Because you see, whichever way, when consumption is cut down, is the people who suffer.
Right.
When there's inflation, it's again the people who suffer.
Yeah.
Right?
Dr. Ekanaka, interestingly, I've always tried to figure out why Sri Lanka has a budget proposal at the end of the day. Now, if you look at the 2021 budget, based on the open budget survey that was carried out in 2021, only 6% of the promises made in the 2021 budget were fulfilled. Only 6% of expenditure proposals tracked in the 2021 budget were classified as fulfilled. This means that the government fully implemented just 6% of the projects planned for the year 2021, neglecting, Dr. Ekanaka, projects related to the provision of health services, water supply and children's education. Now, if tomorrow's budget will also be something of that sort.
It may well happen that way. See, the budget is, at the end of the day, is a wish list. It's a wish list, a kind of a listing out of all what one could think of is put in the budget. But that is constrained by the availability of resources. Now, as you Shamir yourself mentioned at the start of this conversation, when this budget expenditure side amounts to about 4 trillion, the amended budget
Right,
which is
yes,
being brought up tomorrow,
the year 2022.
The revenue may be just a little over 2 trillion. So there's a gap of 1.5. So what does it mean? It means if other money cannot be found, only part of that money is found, the actual expenditure will be sharply reduced. Now,
But are we living beyond our means, Dr. Ekanaka? Is that what this budget deficit goes on to show?
in fact, that is the bottom of all the ills, economic ills we have in this country. We have had, I have repeated in this forum many, many times, over 74 years, only 4 or 5 years we have had a balanced budget or some surplus, even at a primary surplus level, right? That's the reality. So when you have serial budget deficits, what the gap has to be met by domestic borrowing and overseas borrowing.
Right.
In the case of domestic borrowing, right, it is treasury bills and bonds and so on, and it starts it's piling up. The big problem is when the government borrows so much, it crowds out the private sector, which is the productive, wealth generating part of the economy. When I say private sector, it includes even a farmer, right? It's not just the corporates you're talking of. I'm talking of anyone who's
Right.
outside the public service. That's private sector. The other part is you borrow overseas, from overseas. In the initial period, we had concessionary, we were eligible for concessionary loans. It disappeared in the first decade of the new century, right? And then we had to borrow commercially. It piles up. So there comes a time when the debt pile is far too large for the economy to be able to manage it. So budget deficit is
Right.
at the bottom of it.
No,
so
but-
we need to get out of it.
Yeah, but Dr. Ekanaka, time and time again, I've seen it as as a child, when a budget is being presented, families of the Sri Lankan communities go out there and wait for a wish list. They expect something to happen with a magic wand, give them some concessions, bring down the price of flour maybe. So isn't that also a little bit too far-fetched when it comes to a budget? The expectation of the people have always been there will be concessions from a budget as well. Isn't that a misinformation that has taken place? A budget is not that alone.
It's unfortunately this the political culture where the politicians have they promise stuff, right, and then they will give it either with available funds or borrowed funds, or they will print money. What happens? Now, if you take 2020-21 period, the money supply grew by about 40%.
Right.
And then now we have inflation running in excess of 50%, 60% kind of thing.
68% right now, yeah.
So what has happened? What was given, the so-called goodies or concessions given out of non-existent resources, is taken back from the people by way of inflation. Inflation is actually a tax. It's an tax on the people because that reduces the amount of money they can spend. And that's what has happened.
So,
right? So the point I want to bring here is that large budget deficits is the main cause of the current economic issue. When I talk of budget deficits, Shamir, I must add one thing though. It doesn't mean that budget has to be perfectly balanced.
Yeah,
you can carry some deficit.
It doesn't happen anywhere in the world. It happens not in many parts of the world.
No, there's a logic to it also. You can have a deficit, but that deficit funding has to go into productive activities. Economy will grow, so you will be able to repay that debt.
Not like the Nelum Kuluna, for an example.
So therefore,
am I right?
If I have 5% or below, around 5% GDP budget deficit is not a bad thing.
Yeah, but not spending money on the Nelum Kuluna and Hambantota Harbour, the Hambantota International Convention Centre.
Absolutely.
Right.
And there's one other thing I like to add here to that. I personally feel we have the wrong notion of development. We feel if there are big buildings, wide roads, right, and Nelum Kulunas and so on, that the nation develops. I think so the development paradigm, the way we look at development should shift, I think. We should shift more towards human capital, capabilities, innovation, without this concrete development.
Yeah. So we speak about transparency and all that, Gajendra. And today I just saw that there was a hotel that was burnt in Singharaja a couple of weeks ago when the unrest took place. And at that time, the son of a popular politician said that the property was not owned by him. Today, the same politician's son is saying that the property was a partnership, and look at the mess that we are in. Politicians, at the end of the day, have got rich, isn't it, Gajendra? And the people have become poor.
It's very, very obvious, no? The way people, the Aragalia came up. Nothing happens in this country if the politicians fail. Nothing happens, no? So,
so talking about transparency, I think you're also very careful today to use your words, no, Gajendra?
I must have exhausted my words.
Look at where we've fallen into, unfortunately. Anyway, we're talking about democracy and all that, and look at where we are. Anyway, moving on. Talking about budget transparency, how important is budget transparency, Gajendran? Because the Open Budget Survey for the year 2021 very clearly articulates that Sri Lanka was ranked 93rd out of 120 countries globally for budget transparency. The country has only received a score of 30 out of 100, which is a significant drop from its previous score of 47 out of 100 in 2019. How important is budget transparency, Gajendran?
I think before transparency, you have to fix accountability. You know, misfeasance, non-feasance, malfeasance, in this country nothing happens to you. So without getting accountability into place, when people make decisions and when they make pronouncements and they offer promises, and you said only 60% was implemented. If
6%.
6%. Yes,
60% is well,
no, 6%,
very good.
6%
is, but Sri Lanka.
I don't know where you read that from, but
this is from the Open Budget Survey that was released by Verity Research.
Verity. Okay.
Yeah.
So if that is true, it has to be people who made those decisions, who are making decisions on the lives and livelihood of the people at large. They have to be accountable. Once that comes into play, transparency will come. They have to come and explain and say, this is what we wanted, this is what we implemented, this is what we couldn't do. And if you can't do, then your head must roll. You must step down and go, I couldn't do my job.
Or flee the country.
Huh?
Or flee the country.
That's one way of giving up your job.
Mr. Gajendran, if I may ask you now, you are a tax expert, you're a tax consultant. Now we see, obviously, one of the biggest parts of our revenue of the country come from taxes. And we've seen a lot of reformations when it comes to tax reforms with the crisis happening in the country. And now we are at a very critical juncture and we have a very critical budget coming out tomorrow. In your expert opinion, what tax concessions, tax reforms should we go for in the budget that is coming out tomorrow? What would you suggest?
The details of the budget has been already from the revenue side, was already pronounced on 31st of May when the President was the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister's media division released some information what taxes were being brought back. They are basically trying to go back to 2019 level taxes. So if you see the individual rates of taxes, the highest rate is marginal rate is going to 32%, and that will reach that rate at 10.2 million income or over. Similarly, corporate taxes are going up from 24% to 28%. Income tax individuals are going from 18 to 32%. The VAT rates have already been increased because some of the rates you can manage it through gazette notifications. But certain things you have to go through the legislative process. So now the legislative process have gone through now. Even the tax, the VAT threshold was at 300 million per the year or 75 million per quarter. That has been scaled down to 120 million for the year or 30 million for the quarter. So these have been already pronounced. There is some betting and gaming levy, the annual fees have been revised, and the gross collections rates have been pushed up to 10 to 15%. That has been already been done, I believe. And telecom levies have been also restored back to where it was. It was from 15, it came to 11, it's going to 15. But in all these endeavors, you must make sure the businesses are challenged. If you see the larger corporates in the published accounts, larger corporates are making humongous profits because the smaller ones are scaled off, right? So the bigger ones are getting bigger. So one important aspect we have to keep in mind is the principle of capacity to pay taxes to go. The easy way of collecting the tax is indirect taxes. VAT rate has already come to 12%. You can put to 15%, 18%. The people at as Anura said, the people who will finally take the bill are the people who consume essentials. And if you start removing the exemption, starting taxing them, then they will be the tax. So the you have to have a mechanism of getting the people who make profits to share a larger proportion. Now people might say that social security or that surcharge levy was not fair by the larger corporates, but the truth of the matter is this is over a certain amount of income. So
but also there are many concerns now. We are also in a juncture where we need to make sure that
that's what I'm saying. That another point I have to say is, the tax policy should not look as anti-business end of the day, right?
So how do we strike the right balance?
No, that's very important. Anti-business is, now we have given plethora of exemptions. Now I think the modern thinking, contemporary thinking, you can't give blanket exemptions, and we gave exemptions where the exemption period exceeded the life of the project even. It's meaningless. Right? So, but where business make investments, they must be given additional benefits, not the normal benefits. When there are savings, monies are saved because we need money, saving because our savings rate is generally very poor, is 18-20%, which is not enough. Then also value drivers, you have to incentivize for value drivers like learning, relearning, retraining, for improving your business products, business processes, product processes, because now even in this current environment, if a business is to survive, they have to improve their business processes. There has to be constant, continuous research and development. When you say research and development, this is not lab research. Ongoing study to improve the businesses as under different trying circumstances. Then you have to give incentivizing for going green, rebranding. These types of things you have to incentivize. Otherwise, how can a businessman, if a foreigner you come and invest in Sri Lanka, what does he get? Well, give me 2-3 reasons why you should invest here. Right, so you can collect taxes, go for the capacity to pay principal, but at the same time don't forget the business and don't make them anti. The regulating to get hit at the businesses, trying to say you are violating this or like, that is not going to happen. Right. Because the businesses, they will move wherever, whether Sri Lankan business or foreign businesses, because the countries are waiting to invite you, right? Because business are the people who add value, add wealth.
Right.
Wealth producers have to be protected. Yeah. They are the people who can help you.
Now, given your work that you've done as a tax consultant and as an expert, do you think investing in Sri Lanka, or does it have an anti-business sentiment right now? Because when you consult businesses, do you see that, because I recollect the former minister Dhammika Pereira went on to say that the president was not even fit to be the minister of finance at that time. And do you think that the anti-business rhetoric is also something that is now taking place?
No, my point here is there is now everyone is focusing on revenue consolidation.
Right.
Because we have to do, and whatever the IMF is wanting us to do is not what the IMF wants us to do, it is what a good finance minister should do. You don't need others to come and tell you what to do. So in this process now because if you see this year also the deficit can go up to 2 trillion with the revised estimates. So now you had to establish the base for revenue consolidation. Because then you will look at only revenue and miss the trick on this, where businesses, where you have to encourage them to serve. Already people are here, you must facilitate them. You have to incentivize, not giving exemptions, but if they make productive investments, there has to be some additional release, which is already in the laws, which may have to be extended, like enhanced depreciation. If you have any business process re-engineering, we are improving the product process, you have to encourage them. Otherwise, what is already they are hit.
Investing money on fixed deposits and treasury bills at the moment, and the borrowing aspect has curtailed very significantly in the country at the moment. Does that mean in the longer run, or in a few months from now, or a few years from now, the banking sector in Sri Lanka would come under tremendous pressure?
Not only on that basis, but with the due to the current economic crisis,
Right.
that includes the forex market related things as well as the increase in interest rates. There is some pressure on the financial sector, which may witness some difficulties. Certainly, we say that we don't have the liquidity at the moment in the market, because liquidity in the sense now people have put money to treasury bill or fixed deposit or in other forms, so reduce the liquidity so that to control the inflation in that way. So less borrowing means you have less money at the moment in terms of rupees and notes and coins.
Right.
So it is true that there is some sort of what we call the pressure.
Yeah, a lot of people, the questions that they ask right now is, Dr. Singh, is, I have 100 or 200,000 rupees of money. Where am I going to put my hard-earned money right now? Where are they supposed to go and invest that money? Is it safe to invest their money in terms of a fixed deposit at a private sector bank in Sri Lanka at the moment?
So those are difficult questions anyway, to say that which banks are very safe.
No, but do you mean to say, Dr. Singh, that the banking sector of Sri Lanka may also collapse in the
No, I don't intend to say that way. What I want to say is that there is some amount of pressure on the banking sector. Generally you have
because
the currency.
The banking sector, most of the banks have been downgraded as well by international rating agencies.
Yeah, that itself reflect that there is a certain pressure or kind of a uncomfortability in the banking sector in terms of their operations and maintaining.
No, because what I'm trying to figure out, Dr. Singh, I'm sorry to keep on interrupting you, because I want to get the best answer for the public who are watching the show tonight. Now, take a look at the international banks in Sri Lanka at the moment. Their interest rates are hovering between 4% and 9%. But let's look at the local banking sector of Sri Lanka. Their interest rates are hovering at around 20 to 22% at the moment. What is the reason behind this? So people who are watching the market from outside may come to the conclusion that putting their money in an international bank is safe, and not the private sector banks or government sector banks in Sri Lanka.
I think we can say that there is a pressure on the banking sector, in particular the domestic banking sector, but certainly I'm sure that certain measures have been taken in order to avoid what we call the kind of a banking crisis. Okay, now.
But isn't that what we are heading to right now?
No, I don't think that there are signs as such when you compare the other countries which basically get into the banking crisis after this financial crisis. There is a pressure, but all depend on how we basically proceed with the economic reforms. And a number of times you may remember that the what we call the safety nets for the banking sector discuss about a safety net, and I'm sure that certain measures have been taken, and central bank is closely monitoring, in particular the commercial banking sector, so that chances are very less, though we have a pressure. And one thing I want to add with respect to the question that you raised earlier, like when I say the people are corrupt. Now you could see that politicians get elected again and again. No? Same minister get elected again and again. Okay, regardless of the various charges or various allegations made against him with respect to corruptions.
Right.
Now why people elect like that? Now people, all the time, every year you get the wish list. And why government continue to submit such a list every year? Every year why you get an election manifesto with some number of promises? I mean, that means certainly there is a culture where people one way or the other expect, you know, various things from the people, and that is why with the huge budget deficit that politicians tend to, you know, implement certain subsidy programs and other things. Larger majority of people, and they don't concern about whether how many, I mean the percentage of proposal implemented. I mean, you can publish only 6% implemented, others just neglected and all, but how many people pay sufficient attention to such information here in Sri Lanka? That is the situation. Okay, that is the situation. Right. I mean, in a we discuss about the accountability and all these things, but people pay less attention on those important principles, and larger majority of, I mean not all people, larger majority of people pay less attention on that. That is why we can't implement some of those principles and get politicians to basically comply with those standards.
Right. Dr. Ekanayake, right now we've announced default. We've missed interest payments which were due on the 3rd of June, 28th of June, 18th of July, and a principal payment due on the 25th of July as well. Now this information is based on the rating agency S&P Global. Do you think in the run-up to the year 2030, Sri Lanka may announce default at least 2 to 3 times?
See, this is the reason why debt sustainability analysis is required. That is
because
why
the debt is standing approximately
IMF says
dollars.
Come up with a economic model plan, and also get agreement with the lenders, those who have given us loans, for some restructuring of the debt, so that you will be able to continue to service debts which you have obtained. Now, again, the ball is in the court of our policymakers, politicians and the bureaucrats, right, to make sure that the right policies are implemented in terms of managing the economy over a period of time. If you don't do the right thing, it can happen. Now, that is why there are several Latin American countries where defaults have happened over and over again. So we cannot, unless we
like
have...
Argentina, for an example, Dr. Ekanayake.
I mean, Venezuela, Argentina, many countries. This has happened. Even European countries, it has happened.
But what is the secret behind a country like Argentina, Dr. Ekanayake? Because if you look at that country, even though they have announced bankruptcy many times, they have announced defaults many times, the country seems to be standing tall still.
Well, it's a matter of, partly it's a matter of opinion, whether the country is a highly prosperous country and all that, because they have been sort of going by the literature, going from crisis to crisis, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have a crisis, then there's some kind of settlement. After a while, they'll go back the same old way. But when you look at the same old way,
isn't that something that we'll see in the DNA of Sri Lanka in the months to come and the years to come?
No, the thing is, this is the first time it happened in Sri Lanka. No? So I think it's in it. I mean, we have what it takes to make sure it won't happen again. But of course, there has to be institutional remedies. There will have to be culture change. There will have to be awareness being built, right? All of these things will have to happen, you know, in order to get what you may call informed and intelligent behavior of the voters, for example, right? So all these things will have to happen to make sure that defaults won't happen again and again.
Yeah.
But if we continue to do this business of living beyond our means, promising sun and the moon to the people every time when there's an election, irrespective of our capabilities, then it will happen again.
Yeah.
But I hope,
Right.
because the pain of this is so high, I hope it won't happen ever again. And I think given a chance, right, we Sri Lankans have what it takes to make sure it won't happen again.
Yeah, Dr. Ekanaka, why I'm posing this question to you is Sri Lanka has to pay approximately around 27 billion US dollars by the year 2027, which is not far away from now.
Yeah.
We are now looking at a restructuring of a standby arrangement or an emergency loan of approximately around 3 billion. We are looking for a helping hand from the Paris Club. We're looking at a helping hand from our bilateral donors to see whether they could take a haircut, so on and so forth. So I'm trying to figure out, with 27 billion US dollars to be paid in the year 2027 and not having any money right now and only trying to salvage the country's economy right now with 3 billion US dollars from the IMF, I'm trying to wonder whether Sri Lanka can survive. It sounds very scary at the moment.
It is scary. It's a tough ask. But you know that 27 billion is as it stands now. So if there is in the debt restructuring, if there's a reprofiling agreement, right, the time period to settle those debts is extended, then that bunching up won't be there. So you know the payment can become easier. So that's one part of it.
Yeah. So Dr. Ekanaka, let's say now we are not paying any debtors, as you said.
No, we are paying.
Yeah.
We are paying
only multilateral.
the senior debt.
Right.
Senior debt meaning multilateral
debt. That's
World
the
Bank,
ADB,
ADB,
World
Bank, and so on.
So on and so forth.
And in fact, it's quite large. Huh?
Right.
We are still, if you look at the next 12 months, the senior debt repayment amounts to about $3 billion. In total, it was going to be around $6 billion
Right.
a year. So it's still quite substantial,
So
and we are
when
paying
will
that.
we start paying our international obligators like the sovereign bonds and all that? Because right now we have a complete freeze on that. So when will we start paying this?
It will depend, Shamir, it will depend on the
Restructuring
negotiations,
agreement. Okay,
right? And it will take a few months, I think. And then there will be an agreement, hopefully, favorable agreement, where it can be any combination of time period to pay, annual coupon rate, and the principal. So all these three things can vary depending on the success of the negotiations. But I think Sri Lanka must try and get an extension of the time period so that this 27 billion bunching can be spread over a longer period,
So in
maybe
fact,
2-3 years. And then hope is, apart from IMF funds, maybe $3 billion, $4 billion,
right.
that is about $1 billion a year, but along with it, further multilateral and bilateral support to be obtained. And the economy to grow, particularly the exports to grow, right, during that time period, so that the debt sustainability can be achieved.
Yeah, but Dr. Ekanaka, for exports to grow, as Gajendran mentioned along with Dr. Dunasinghe, there has to be a proper plan, isn't it? Because right now we are not seeing that plan. Yeah. We are not seeing any signals, unfortunately.
True.
The only signal that we're seeing is some sort of suppression every single time, isn't it?
So this is why I said it's a tough ask, and again, as I said, the policymakers have to get together and decide what are the critical things we got to do to make Sri Lanka make the environment conducive for investment, right? Increase production and export.
But I'm not in any way trying to paint a scary picture, but we have to look at what is ahead of us. We not only have to pay 27 billion, our overall debt stands at 51 billion US dollars, Gajendran.
Yeah.
So we need some support from international community. And if we have a very steadfast approach to the way in which how we arrest individuals, how our human rights record is reflecting globally, Gajendran, don't you think this is also going to have a very very significant impact on our borrowings, on our lendings, or on any way that we are looking for some help?
The key thing
from the
now,
international
Swami,
community.
the key thing now at the moment, the deciding factor, the crucial critical factor for us to go forward is this making this debt sustainable. Debt sustainability program. Now, when you say of restructuring of these debts, to my mind, there are three ways you can do. One, Anwar said, you are reprofiling, you extend the period of the debt settlement. Debt settlement period is agree with the lenders. The another one you can do is haircuts. Certain percentages of debts you say we don't pay. Then also with all these things you might increase the rate of interest payments, right? And all this you are doing not for the lenders to take a hit on them. You know, they are not going to come and say, look here, you are mucked up, you know, we are going to take the hit. Why should the lenders take? But you are giving them a workable program that you will be able to restore their position over a long period of time, like in the case of bank.
Is that why, Gajendran, China is not willing to
No,
restructure?
1 minute, I'll come that to you. Now, so that for that to happen, we have to look into all our revenue. This is what's the reason why this is all getting slightly delayed, because this is a huge task. Whether we are capable of doing, or the team is there, the task is there, the competency there, I don't know. But this is what you have to do. Revenue you have to rehash. Expenditures you have to rehash, right? Then the investments, export sectors, imports you have to see. If you can't meet this thing, you will have to keep curtailing the imports. This has to go on. This curtailment of restriction of the imports is not going to happen. And with that, then you show a path of survival for us to restructure all these things. So this is going to be a huge task. You know, it's not going to be. And what is happening is, the longer we delay, the gaps, the bridging finance, we'll need more and more. Who is going to give us? Our ratings has to go back. Important why IMF is this thing. They are not. This 3 billion is nothing in this whole program. But once IMF comes in, the rating agencies will go up. Credibility will go up, because then the public will know, the world will know that we have come with a debt sustainability program. And I think now increasingly IMF will not lend to any country without the country demonstrating debt sustainability. Because if many countries fail, then IMF will also fail. IMF is public money, our money. We have 1.12% or something in the IMF as a shareholder, stakeholder. So we are a stakeholder of the IMF. So all this has to be done, and that is the reason. If you even see the US that oversight body for foreign debts, I forget the name, fails me.
Senate.
Yeah, so they have said, look here, one thing is you have to have independence of the central bank. That is not only legislation, independence is a state of mind. So central bank officials should be satisfied they are independent, the people should be satisfied, the other stakeholders should be satisfied it is independent. They are saying you have to manage and curb corruption. Because they have told us we are a corrupt country, right? They are telling, others are telling us you have to do this.
But not only Sri Lanka, no, Gajendra, even Singapore is corrupt, no?
Right. We'll come to that matter later, right? The other one is rule of law. Right, they are saying you have to the human rights, all that is come, because you know, if we don't behave, the others will come and tell how to behave. So this is a huge task.
Guys, sorry to interrupt you. You didn't answer one of my earlier questions. I asked you, Is that why China is not willing to restructure its
No,
debt?
China has been repeatedly saying they have never restructured any debts for any country. They have only refinanced. You know, that is because they don't restructure, but if you need money, we'll give you some more money to come out of the problem. Now that model, now China is saying we go for refinance. The West is saying we must go for restructure. Now this is the balance that you had to work out. It's devil in the deep blue sea, which is good or bad is a different matter. So now, so we have to come to a point where we are able to agree and bring all of them in one page. That country says we have been, you have to understand their position. If we restructure Sri Lankan debt, there are so many other countries will come and ask them to restructure. So they don't want to create a precedent. So we'll have to see what it is. You know.
So what happens if China does not agree to the restructuring process?
I think China will also have to agree on some mechanism if they are interested in their debts, right? Because finally,
because they have done some sort of restructuring, Dr. Ekan, if I'm not mistaken, in Zambia, right?
Yeah. So they.
But I don't know exactly what the compromise is. I wonder whether Priyanka knows.
Basically, I think China and the France together led the creditors team in basically arranging this restructuring, but detail with respect to the
is not available.
It is not available yet.
Right.
But it is a good sign in that sense that China is taking some, sort of some positive steps towards debt restructuring, because not just the Sri Lanka but some other countries are on the way to face the same.
Yeah, Dr. Dulusar, I want to ask you this question. Now even Pakistan is finding it difficult right now.
Yeah.
So not only Sri Lanka, I saw one of the articles that was published on an international news magazine, which says that there are many countries which may go into default in the coming 1 or 2 years.
No, it is, I think, partly due to, situation similar to that. There are number of developing countries which, also had structural issues in the long run and had the negative impact during the COVID, and as a result, they are about to witness some economic crisis in terms of defaulting, or in terms of difficult to pay back debts, or they may want to get the IMF support. So different stages. But one positive thing is that many countries, I am sure, may have learned from Sri Lanka, delaying Sri Lanka's process into get IMF support actually made the thing very difficult. Because after defaulting we decided to go, on that basis now IMF asked for a debt sustainability plan, and prior to any such agreement. So we would have avoided this situation.
Right.
Anyway, now this is how it happened, and I think when you look at the other developing countries' past experience, many countries have done debt restructuring few times during the matter of, say, 2 decades, 1 to 2 decades. So that means that the probability of getting into a similar crisis after every 5 to 6 years, we cannot deny, or we cannot rule out.
Right.
So in that context, it is very important that Sri Lanka solve this issue with required policy reforms, not just in the area of economic reform but also the political reforms. Because even though we see this economic crisis led to this political crisis or political fallout, actually what happened, the political crisis or the governance crisis actually led to this economic crisis.
Absolutely.
Failure to have a public finance management update and revise, reforms our rules and regulation, laws, all basically had an impact on this irresponsible behavior with respect to public finance and the other related areas.
So I want to ask the three of you, the three panelists today. Let's say someone has some excess amount of money right now. What is the safest way, and where is the safest way to invest this money? I'll start off with Gajendra, because Gajendra is having a grin on his face as well.
Hold on to your money.
That's your expertise. That's your expert area, no?
Hold on to your money.
Hold
on to your money.
Usually, getting Gajendra to comment on something like this is also money. Every second is money. But today we are doing it free of charge. So yes, Gajendra, let's start off with you.
No, the official financial system, as it was explained earlier, it is pretty stable, and the banks are fairly capitalized still at the moment, as long as we don't mess up further. And even the restructuring of the domestic debt, central bank governor has ruled out at the moment. So even if that is going to happen, it can happen in a limited way, not in a broad scale where the people can get affected. Until such time we have no power to print superfluous money, So apart from that, people, what they are trying to do is if they have money, they are trying to put into property. Because property, particularly land, and not much on buildings, if they can, because nothing can happen to the land, and always land is a short supply, because 85% of the land mass of the country is owned by the government. So private ownership is only about 15%. And also sometimes people are trying to hold in gold because commodities. But of course gold prices also may have come down recently, I believe. There are market forces. So it's the point is, if you are having some money, you are lucky that you are having some money, because
yes, definitely.
So you are in those rare class at the moment.
You feel some security, you have.
Yeah.
Right. Before I move to Dr. Ekanayake, let's talk about treasury bills, because I know a lot of people during the recent past have been investing on treasury bills through banks. Gajendran, is there any possibility that the central bank may take a haircut on treasury bills?
No, I think central bank governors categorically said that it's not going to happen.
Right.
Technically, even if it is going to happen, it has to be on long-term debts. The treasury bills are very short-term,
Right. That's I have follow-up question to that as well. Will there be an instance where the interest would be paid and not the capital?
The local ones?
Yeah.
No, that's what the central bank governor ruled out. No.
Right. So there's
at the moment he has ruled out. Yes. At the moment.
So it may happen next week.
Yeah, it can have. Anything can happen to this country if we mismanage further. You can be sure of it.
Yeah. Dr. Ekanayake, I'll rephrase that question, same question that I asked Gajendran about money. I'm going to put a figure now. Let's say someone has 500,000 rupees of his hard-earned money. What must he or she do?
I have to give you the standard stockbroker's reply. That is, if you have only 5,000 rupees, 500,000 rupees, don't put the whole thing in one instrument, split it, because then what you are doing is you are kind of managing the risk, right? So put it, divide into, let's say, 3, right? Put one part into real estate if you can, another part into fixed deposits, right? Another part into treasury bills, maybe split it into 4, put some in stocks and shares. Because then what happens is the risk attached to each of those are not equal now. So even the worst happens to one sector, you have got something saved in the other.
But right now, Dr. Ekanayake, the stock market is also slightly in the
No, that's what I'm
downward
saying.
trend.
I mean, I was illustrating. There are many people who feel in Sri Lanka investing in real estate is very safe. But again, we have seen that in recent times now, according to central bank data, if you look at the first half of this year, the land valuations have not increased as fast as they used to be in the previous years. So there's a slowdown. But the thing about land is it doesn't disappear now. It stays there. Right? One can argue that a bank can collapse. But remember,
Land can't vanish.
yeah, land can't, also can, I suppose, vanish at times, but in general. And mind you, treasury bills and government securities are considered gilt-edged. Huh? That's where the risk is lowest.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's very risk-free based on what the governor of the central bank had already said.
Yeah.
Dr. Dinusingha, now you're a member of the
How much money you?
member of the stakeholder engagement committee as well. So
Yeah, how much you? How much money you think?
let me put a figure there. Let me say someone has 1 million Sri Lankan rupees. What must I asked Dr. Ekanayake about 500,000. 1 million. I'm talking about an average middle class, a hard-earned individual who's trying to earn some money, who has some investments at the moment, who does not know what to do with it. What must they do?
Basically, I think all the options, all the possible saving mechanism mentioned. But at the same time, it is important in this context to keep the money some sizable amount with you, given the uncertainties around you. Sometime we do not know whether we may need some money in an urgent manner, either to buy maybe the medicine or to buy some other stuff. So in my case, I mean, if it is a small amount, maybe rather than investment, maybe good to keep in liquid form to meet the urgent situation.
Sales is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality. That's what.
That's what you advise your clients, Gajendra.
Cash is reality.
Right. So, I want to ask another question from the three panelists because I want to get your expert advice on this. Will the year 2022 make you rich, or will it contribute for you to disappear the money or liquid cash that you have this year, the next 4 months? Rajendra?
22, our rupee balances have been halved, no?
Yeah.
In real sense, our wealth has been halved. What you have in rupees, basically, if you have, it has been halved. When you look at the prices, the rupee depreciation, the prices escalating, your purchasing power of your money is at least halved. So if you had 100,000 rupees before, it's equivalent to only 50,000 in that sense. So that position is not going to change in 2022, basically.
Dr. Ekanayake?
No, I mean, I echo what Gajendran just said. See, there's no business, there's no lawful business activity where you can make a profit of that magnitude, right? And interest rates, yes, treasury bills in the primary market has gone up to about 30%. In the secondary market, you might get at mid-20s, and in FDs, some banks are offering, as you said, 20%, 22% kind of thing. But that against halving of the value of money, which has happened this year. So this year, everybody is losing money really. In terms of purchasing power, everybody is losing money. The degree of loss depends on where you have put your money. Now, see, savings deposits are the worst. They're giving you 4% average, right? And there are people who keep significant amounts of money in savings deposits. I don't know why they do it. You know, in the entire banking system, about 30% of the deposits are in savings accounts. Why people do it?
Because they need
Because
that access to
because-
cash.
yeah,
Access to cash.
Yeah.
To make them liquid.
Doctor, this
Yeah, I think now even though many are losing in this context, we can see some gaining. For example, exporters, they are basically earnings in rupee terms have increased, and also some local under this import restrictions, some local businesses make profits, and even for example, travel agents are doing a very good job at this moment. Okay, so there are some who gain even in this crisis situation, and as a country, certainly yes, wealth came down, but will come down, but there are some segments who have really gained, and while the larger majority lost.
right. So, Dr. Ekanayake, I have a question from one of our viewers directed at you. What should be done to those who got us to this situation knowingly and willfully?
No, they should be made accountable. How do you make them accountable? The traditional answer was defeat them at the elections. Now, whether that is good enough is a big question. So, accountability, there are many ways in which you can establish it. One is, as Gajendran said earlier, at least make sure that they don't make money illegally, right? So make you accountable for the money you have made. So if you have a property, people, you know, if you make money in whatever way, you got to put it somewhere. So say you have a hotel, a house, right? But you don't seem to have source of income to do it, right? Make them prove. Otherwise, right? Tax them, right? Because you can compute. Gajendran will know how to do it, right? You can compute an income stream which will permit you to build that house, and you apply the standard tax rate, perhaps with a penalty as well. Right? So there are ways in which this can be handled, and of course, if there's an outright illegal activity under the prevailing legal system, you can take action. Now, the issue is laws are there, whether action is being taken. And now increasingly you can see that individuals are going to courts, right, on these sort of issues. We'll have to wait and see what kind of outcomes will be there. So the simple answer is make the politicians and the bureaucrats accountable. Many ways are there to do that.
Dr. Ekanayake,
Yeah.
please excuse my late entry to the program. I've been watching, enthralled by what you have been saying. You referred to this point about knowingly and willingly, those who have brought us in this position today. But is there also an argument for maybe those who unknowingly brought into this position? I'm talking about people with a lack of know-how.
Okay.
Perhaps.
But there are people now, I just want to add to that, Shrehan. Now, the former governor of the central bank, for an example, Dr. Ajit Nivad Kabral, exactly knew where we were heading. P.B. Jayasundar, for an example, knew exactly what was going on in the country. So mustn't accountability really start from that itself. They've done it willfully. They knew exactly what was going on. They spoke about this. They had a roadmap. They said that the money is going to be sourced domestically, so on and so forth. They said that they don't want to go to the IMF. They brought in false figures late last year, saying that the balance was at 3.8 billion US dollars. So mustn't action be taken against individuals of this caliber, Dr. Ekanayake?
I'm not too sure how I can respond to the question, because there is a fundamental rights case or several which are there, so I don't want to address this specific question. My point is, wherever the our legal system provides instruments, we have to use them. And if the available instruments are insufficient, then we should go and legislate them, bring them in. There are all sorts of examples all over the world. But this question, I mean, we need to really ask a top lawyer on if somebody didn't know, what do you do? I have no answer to that. The damage is there, but it's like an accident. So you might have, in the case of somebody being killed in an accident, it's not murder, right? It is a lesser offense, right? So maybe it may be something like that.
Gajendran, I asked you about this corruption question and you skidded away, and I don't know whether it was a bouncer or whether it was a yorker, but you failed to respond to that. When I asked you questions about corruption, not only in Sri Lanka, corruption is even seen in countries like Singapore as well.
There are corruption wherever humanity is self-seeking is going to be there. Self-interest, self-seeking over public, and especially, particularly why it's important is when people come and sit on public money and they make decisions for the public. They assume the role of you in their positions there, and if they don't make the best of decisions intently for personal seeking and self-seeking, that is basically misgiving and is corruption. So that is wherever humanity is there, corruption is there. But I think we have taken it to a different level here in this country.
In Sri Lanka, no?
Yeah, that's the difference.
That of course is very true.
Dr. Dunusung, I'd like to ask this question from.
No, but look at just very quickly. But look at where the country is, Gajendran. You have a president who was responsible for many issues that took place in the country today. He's not even able to find a place to stay. In terms internationally, look at how many issues have taken place with regard to houses, public property being mismanaged, public property being utilized, high-ranking political officials going scot-free. That's where the country is, isn't it, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned?
Going forward, this country has to do two things. You have to make sure corruption is becoming almost impossible. It has to be done. And you have to make sure people who are, at least you are selected for a job, not elected, selected for the job, the best and the brightest are selected, so that you don't go into imbecile decision making, adroitness, alertness, and competence is demonstrated at the highest level. It has to be there, and then you have to have accountability, naturally. You have to be answerable, and transparency, good governance. These are good terminologies, all are using it, right? But you have to give real sense and meaning, and you have to demonstrate. Here, this is what we happened, this is what has happened. So it is very important. Unless you do this, and if there is greater willingness to be done at the highest apex decision making, the mother body, that is the parliament, it has to flow from there. You can't expect people down the line to be honest when people at the top are not there. The people down the line will look at the people at the top and they are going to follow. So this has to come. Whether it's going to come little by little or a bang approach, I don't think we can do this creepingly. It has to be done, and till that happens, we are going to have this challenge. And what we are experiencing don't think it's going to be a short term. You know, even the highest of leaders have spoken about food security. You know, people who are starving, 50% of the population is going below the poverty level. You know, all these things are happening, and the people's resilience, there is a limit to this. You know, especially if your child at home doesn't have food, you can't expect the parents, they'll become daredevils. You know, you can't. So you have to. We can't have a set of leaders who are living in a different planet altogether. You know, so basically, if you want, you have to make sure corruption and competencies are at the top.
Dr. Dhanusingh, I was going to ask you now, previously you mentioned how some exporters, some big exporters in the country, they actually did well during this crisis. And also on the other hand, we see that some major exporters that contribute a lot to the forex of the country have suffered the brunt of the crisis. So in your opinion, and also being a part of the stakeholders engagement committee, in your opinion, what have they done right to make the best out of this crisis and also rise up above it? And also the others who have lost out, what have they done wrong in your opinion?
No, most of the successful exporters have basically they have entered into new markets, or they have, for example, they faced the challenge successfully. In particular, the apparel exporters, if you look into, they badly witnessed some decline with respect to women's wear, but from the other products, they were able to basically expand their exports into major export destination. Even they are into this mask, exporting mask and other sanitary, other related medical, sector garments and clothes.
So basically, you're saying a total overhaul of their strategy helped them survive.
Yes, definitely. They basically changed their strategies and taken up the challenge and face the challenges in the market. And also some of the other sectors like food exports, some into the spices and related areas had a good time. Even the tea had a good time until this Ukraine-Russia war, unfortunately erupted, and as a result witnessed some volume, decline. But I think as a whole,
but the tea industry, Dr. Dhanusingh, because you spoke about the tea industry, has seen 3.9 million drop in kilograms.
Yes, due to the fertilizer
crisis.
Yes, fertilization. Yes. Yeah. From one side, you had the domestic production crisis decline, and on the other, demand side.
Yeah. Anyway. So we leave it at that as far as the as far as the first and the second rounds are concerned. We go in for a short commercial break. Our discussion today revolves around Interim Budget 2022. Will it make you rich? We've tried to find answers to these questions during our show tonight. We go in for a short commercial break. When we come back, it's the final round. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back.
COVID-19 සඳහා ආරක්ෂිත පියවර. නිතරම හොඳින් සබන් යොදා දෑත් සෝදන්න. සබන් හෝ විස බීජ නාශක මධ්‍යසාරයක් භාවිතා කර දෑත් පිරිසිදු කරන්න. සෑම විටම අන් අය සමග මීටරයක දුරස්ථභාවයක් පවත්වා ගන්න. හැකි සෑම විටම නිවසේ රැඳී සිටින්න. නිරතුරුවම නිවැරදිව මුඛාවරණ පළඳින්න.
A brand new year, a year of hope, a year of aspirations and people looking for inspiration.
Our software engineers, our IT expertise are, not seconding to anyone.
A proper investigation led by the CID. This will be swept under the carpet.
Understanding about the stock market, the fundamentals, the economy, that is very important.
Entire ownership of this reclaimed land as well as the governance of Port City are all under the government of Sri Lanka.
No planet, no people, no business.
Yes.
And this is the simple thing about Biznomics.
Your weekend's most profitable 60 minutes. Biznomics. Saturday and Sunday at 5 p.m.
පවතින සමාජ දේශපාලන ආර්ථික අර්බුද හමුවේ අපි කොහොමද ඉස්සරහට යන්න ඕනේ?
මගේ මතය තමයි ලංකාවට අයිති භූමි ප්‍රමාණයක් විදේශීය සමාගමකට දෙනවා කියන එක. ඒක වැරද්දක් නෙමෙයි. හැබැයි විදේශීය රටකට දෙනවා කියන එක ගැටලුවක්.
රජයට අයිතිකාරයෙක් නැහැ. එයා ගන්න අවුරුදු 5 තුළ එයා කරන ප්‍රොජෙක්ට් වලට ගන්න ලෝන් වලට එයා වගකිය යුතු නැහැ. එතනින් පස්සේ එන කෙනා තමයි වග කියන්නේ. අන්න එතනින් හැදෙන්නේ.
ඔබතුමා දැක්ක රටේ දැවෙනම ප්‍රශ්නේ මොකක්ද අපිට තියෙන්නේ?
අපිට දැන්ට පේනවා පෝර ප්‍රශ්නය පේනවා, කෝවිඩ් ප්‍රශ්නය පේනවා, ඩොලර් ප්‍රශ්නය පේනවා, තෙල් අර්බුදයක් පේනවා. මේවා තමයි දැන් අපිට පෙනෙන ප්‍රශ්න.
ඇයි එහෙම දේවල් කරන්න උත්සාහ ගන්න?
අපිට හොඳ විදුලි ජනනයක් සුනම් බලය මගින් කරන්න පුළුවන්. අතක මේ තාක්ෂණය ලෝකයේ විශාල විදිහට මේක පිරිවේ අඩු වී කියනවා.
මගේ වගකීමක් තියෙනවා මේ පුටුවේ ඉන්නකම් එක මිනිස්සෙක් හරි මේකෙන් බේරගන්න. ඒක තමයි මගේ දැක්.
ජනතාව තමයි අවස්ථාව දීලා
තියෙන්නේ. පැහැදිලිවම. ඒකට බලපානවා අර ඔය කලින් කිව්ව දේශපාලන සංස්කෘතියක් නැතිකම තියෙනවා. ඒක අවසංස්කෘතියක්. සහ දේශපාලන සාක්ෂරතාවයක් නැතිකම.
මේ රටේ මිනිස්සු තෝරපු 225ක් මේ ඉන්නේ. ඒ කියන්නේ මේ අපේ හැඟීම් 225ක් තමයි මෙතන තියෙන්නේ. දැන් අපි හැඟීම් වෙනස් කරගමු. මේ පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට මීට වඩා හොඳ අය යවමු.
Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. Let's start off the final round with Dr. Priyanka Dinusinghe, Senior Lecturer, University of Colombo, and also member of the Stakeholder Engagement Committee of the Central Bank. Your final thoughts?
Yeah, basically I think the budget, interim budget that the President is going to present tomorrow must reflect or at least must pay sufficient attention in addressing some of the burning issues faced by the vulnerable groups, and in order to make sure that their livelihoods are supported sufficiently and allocations are made. Such allocations must be continued with the 2023 budget as well. And also, in addition to that, it is important to we discuss the needs for various government revenue collection. IMF in particular, as I think earlier mentioned by our experts, are very much concerned about the revenue consolidation measures, and also the expenditure side, in addition to reallocation of resources from development oriented projects to those essential services and subsidies. I think it is important to cut down some of the expenditures which are provided on the basis of providing privileges. For example, allocation for vehicle, allocation for houses, allocation for other things, in particular in the area of for security forces and for other public officials. I think no longer we can certainly provide such privileges and such entitles. I think it is time for us to seriously consider them as well during this budget. So right now, I think in the short run we need to think how we basically stabilize the economy before thinking or before expanding it, or at least initiate economic activities and incentivize investors and others to expand the production activities.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dhunsinga, Senior Lecturer at the University of Colombo. I now move my attention to N.R. Gajendran, tax expert.
Samira, now we are talking of the interim budget. Not only I will try to give a philosophical analysis for not only the interim budget but also for the upcoming 23 budget that will be presented in November. So always go back to nature. Take in the case of a flower and a bee. When the bee extracts nectar from the flower, the bee is thrilled because it's getting a stomach full, and the flower is also equally happy because it's getting lighter. One is enriched with nutrients for it to live longer, other one is getting rid of its excess baggage. So similarly, when fiscal policy making is made and administrations are implemented on the revenue side, it is ideally way to have collect goes for the balance for the policy administration in one hand, with the taxpayers on the other hand sitting together looking at a common goal of a win-win solution. So the policy, the government, the state, when they implement policies, then they have to make sure the revenue administration is in sync with them to give effect to those policies, the proper perspective. And the taxpayer also, when he is paying in money for the national cause, he has to get his return for the payment. So we will be focusing heavily on revenue enhancement, this interim budget, even the other one. So you have to make sure the businesses are able to survive. There is no anti-business created. You don't drive the businesses away from this country. You have to identify value drivers, as I mentioned before, people who make productive investments, who go in for, who save money for investment out of the current earnings, and the other value drivers like improving, came up also business process improvement, product process improvement, R&D, training, retraining, branding of products in the country, and also going green. So all this has to be at a mix. I don't know whether we will be able to do that in the interim budget because it's a stopgap matter. When you go to the next one, the spillovers has to be done, and it has to be done very seriously this time. This is sort of the last chance, all are saying, otherwise we are going into repeated situations like some other bad examples, and we can't afford to go. Don't forget, Sri Lanka is a small country, and if we say we are going to come up with a debt sustainability program, it has to be debt sustainable. Otherwise, it's not easy for a small country to survive. And if that is to happen, all these factors have to be taken into account even in the interim budget.
Well, thank you very much, N.R. Gajendran, tax expert. I now move attention to Dr. Andre Kanayaka, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce.
When we talk of budgets, inevitably the focus is on the budget deficit. But I think in this budget and the subsequent budgets, very concrete steps will have to be taken to achieve a reduction in the budget deficit, a reduction in the trade deficit, but I want to emphasize another deficit. Now, we economists have talked a lot over the years about twin deficits, fiscal deficit and on the trade front. The other one which is critical for Sri Lanka right now is a trust deficit. There is a trust deficit at the level of the parliament, and there's a trust deficit, even bigger one, between the parliament and the general public. If you don't sort it out, the first one within the parliament, if that is not sorted out, it will be impossible for the very ambitious reforms to be carried out, because they won't get passed in the parliament. But the other large trust deficit between the general public and rulers has to be sorted out for people to be ready to undergo this level of difficulties, or even higher level of difficulties in the coming period, until things get gradually sorted out.
Okay.
And that can only happen by example. There's no other way. And across the board, our politicians, to different degrees, carry a lot of baggage in terms of this trust deficit. Their past behaviors, practices, track record. And now, right from the top, a demonstration will be necessary to show that we are not merely asking the people to carry the burden, we too are carrying the burden. So if you do that only, I think the other two deficits, which are more hardcore economics,
right,
can be addressed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anurika Nayaka, former chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much, N.R. Gajendran, a tax expert. I can also say philosopher. Can I, Gajendran?
Far from that.
Far from that. Thank you very much, Dr. Anurika Nayaka, for joining us this evening. And thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dinusingha, for joining us this evening on the show. Still not politically aligned to any party, no, Dr. Dinusingha?
Not at all. Not even in future.
Not in the futures. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening on the show. Tonight, next week on Face the Nation, we will be having Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, the governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. He'll be speaking to us with regard to how the restructuring discussions went with the IMF and the World Bank, and he would speak to us with regard to his policy framework for the future of Sri Lanka. So stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. Next week, same time, same place. We will be having an in-depth look at the country's economy and Sri Lanka's monetary policy in length with Dr. Nandalal Veerasinghe, the governor of the Central Bank. Thank you very much, Disal, and thank you very much, Shehan. It's very silent today, Shehan. Tired?
No, this is very happily
observing. Thank you very much, Shehan, for putting up a good show as always, putting up a great panel together to keep our viewers informed. Our topic of discussion today was Interim Budget 2022. How will it make you rich? We tried to find answers to that. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. Government's view of the economy could be summed up in a few short phrases. If it moves, tax it. If it keeps moving, regulate it. And if it stops moving, subsidize it. Is it going to be the ethos of Ranil Wickremesinghe tomorrow? Let's wait and see. Take care. Good night.